is going to once again gain control of the earth that belongs to him.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series Escape the Coming Night, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
Darkness is not an affirmative force. It simply reoccupies the space vacated by the light.
This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio
and Urban Family Talk.
It should be uncomfortable for a believer to live as a hypocrite.
Delivering people out of the bondage of mainstream media
and the philosophies of this world.
God has called you and me to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment. Let's not miss our moment.
And now, the Hamilton Corner.
Good evening. Welcome to the Hamilton Corner here in American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. I am your host, Abraham Hamilton III, here with Mr. J. Tross and Jeff Reed, affectionately referred to as J Squared. We have a jam-packed program for you today. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently because our guest today is going to be Dr. Walter Williams, distinguished economist, a blessing to our nation, quite frankly, where we're going to be discussing President Trump's tariffs. I've wanted to have an economist on the program to discuss these things, so I wanted to reserve my commentary on these issues until we got someone more learned than I on the program to have these conversations. So in addition to Dr. Williams, Lord willing, I plan to also get to, was there a trial run of the whole scam that became the Trump-Russia collusion narrative? Was there a dry run that occurred perhaps in, I don't know, 2012? You definitely want to stick around to hear that because it looks like the evidence is showing that before there was a Fusion GPS latent scandal to attack President Trump, there was a dry run that somebody by the name of Barack Obama used a familiar law firm, Perkins Coie, to pay Fusion GPS for opposition research on Mitt Romney. Rather interesting, right? Then we're also going to talk about, in Oklahoma, there's a mom who was arrested, charged, and has now been sentenced for the crime of incest. Why? She married her own daughter. Having done that after, years prior, marrying her son. And I just have some questions. Of course, we get to the ick factor, and I'll give warnings for parents. We won't get into the seedy details of things of that nature, how the mom talks about her and her daughter hit it off once they were reunited. But I have some questions if we're going to employ the logic that the Supreme Court used in the Obergefell decision. If we have consenting adults who love each other, then what's the problem? We'll get to that in a little bit. Then we'll also talk about famed scientist Stephen Hawking, who at 76 years old has now passed away. And I'll say this, Dr. Hawking clearly has a brilliant mind, naturally speaking, had the changed the world's perception of people who have disabilities in some areas. But I have to tell you, the first thing that struck me when I heard about Dr. Hawking's passing, that I was deeply saddened, deeply saddened, because Professor Hawking, Dr. Hawking, prided himself on being an atheist. And I've seen lots of posts, and some of them have been somewhat calloused, saying that Stephen Hawking is no longer an atheist now, which is absolutely true. But the question I have for myself and the people listening to the Hamilton Corner is, how do we feel? Do we feel anything when people who we know, as well as we can know, they're unbelievers when they expire? I have to tell you that I was saddened, because if, in fact, and I think it's pretty clear from the way he declared himself and the way he lived his life, Stephen Hawking died as an unbeliever. And if he did die as an unbeliever, he won't have an opportunity to repent. So I'm going to get to that a little bit. And I have a lot of other stuff, but to start off, and this is kind of to prepare us for Dr. Walter Williams to come on the program, in case you're wondering, the Democrats have just released this week their tax plan. And much of it, unsurprisingly, rolls back the tax breaks, tax benefits we all received as a result of the tax plan passed by Congress and signed into law by President Donald Trump. But Chucky Schumer and company, they have already laid down the gauntlet to say that they want your money back. They want your money back. But before we get into all of that, I'm excited to have on the program who's joining us right now on our World Changers line, Dr. Walter Williams, who has a bachelor's in economics from California State University, a master's and a PhD from UCLA. He has served on the faculty of George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, as the John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics since 1980. Dr. Williams, thank you for joining me on the program today.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah.
Oh, you are very welcome. Last time we talked, I said I have to have you back on the program. Well, what I wanted to talk to you about is something that's been on my mind, it's been on the mind of the listeners, and I saw that you posted a syndicated column, which I'd encourage everybody to go to walterewilliams.com, that it is a treasure trove of resources and information, because Dr. Williams writes for over 100, well, he's published over 150 publications, and he has syndicated columns that appear weekly all over the country and in the world, quite frankly. But I saw you wrote a column on Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs. Many of us have been following the news. We know President Trump has announced a 25% tariff on steel that is imported from foreign importers and a 10% tariff on aluminum, but he has exempted, for the time being, Mexico and Canada from those tariffs as they attempt to navigate a renegotiation of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. So, Dr. Williams, I wanted to have you on the program. What do you think about President Trump's tariffs plan?
Well, I think that in general, tariffs are always a bad idea in the following sense. That is, surely if you impose tariffs on steel and aluminum, the steel industry will be more profitable. The workers will have higher wages, and there might be greater employment. Okay, so that's as I pointed out in my column, that's the benefit side of it. But whenever there's a benefit to anything, there's going to be a cost, and the cost is seen by it'll be higher prices or higher costs for the steel using industries. That is, companies that use steel, such as John Deere, Ford Motor Company, and all these other users of steel. They will have to pay a higher price, and they will be less competitive in domestically, and they'll be less competitive in the world market. And so I think that the net cost of the tariffs are a negative for the country. And so matter of fact, during the Reagan administration, they imposed tariffs on Japanese cars, and it turned out that it did save jobs in the American auto industry, but at a cost of $800,000 per job saved. I haven't looked at the numbers per job saved with the Trump administration tariffs, but I'm sure that it's going to be worth much more than the salary of the people who work in steel and the aluminum. Now, then also there's another interesting thing about it is that he's working at cross purposes with himself. That is, he says that he wants to rebuild or repair the infrastructure in the United States, and the infrastructure repairs requires the use of steel. So if you make the steel more costly by imposing tariffs on foreign steel, it raises the cost of repairing the infrastructure in our country. So it's working at cross purposes.
Now, when I first responded to this, I said that President Trump appears to have good intentions in his effort to want to bolster the American economy and to aid the American worker. It's on record that the U.S. is the world's largest importer of steel, importing nearly 4 times as much as it exports. The U.S. imported, just in 2016, 5 times as much aluminum as it has exported. So how do we balance this as citizens? I mean, do you think that I'm right in my assertion that President Trump's intentions are to make good on campaign promises and preserve the American worker status in the country? How do we balance that? How do you see that?
Well, it seems like it's in the best interest of our country is to be able to get things that we use as cheaply as possible. That is, we're richer. That is, the lower the cost that we have to pay for things, the richer we are. Now, there's some arguments I've seen that people say, well, it's a national defense issue. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's just pure nonsense. That is, the next war, if there's a major war, it's not going to last 3 or 4 years like the World War II. It's going to be a nuclear war, and it's going to be a very, very short duration. So, and it's not going to allow us to produce things. So, what we don't have at the beginning of the war, we'll just never have. But again, I think that the idea that companies import, that we're importing steel, contributing to deficits, I think that's just really a bad idea.
Now, in terms of aluminum, there are reference to aluminum is used in a range of ground weapons and aircraft, and steel being required for aircraft carriers. But as you asserted, that it appears that on one end, we could be aiding workers in that particular industry, but potentially at the expense of other components of the economy. Why in go right ahead.
Yeah, the other industries that use aluminum, they have to pay a higher price. And then also, and what that does, it gives companies incentives to move overseas. That is, it gives them incentives to locate in countries that don't have the steel tariffs, that don't have the aluminum tariffs. And so it works, again, at cross purposes of what President Trump says he wants.
Now, how do you feel, because the president has said this as well, and this is what I'll give a quote for him. He said, in an effort to discuss potentially having a reciprocal tax system, he said, they charge us 50, we'll charge them 50. Right now, they charge us 50, we charge them nothing. We just want fairness. We want everything to be reciprocal, and I think in the end, we're going to have a lot of great jobs and a lot of great companies all coming back into our country. So the president clearly has zeroed in on what he perceives to be a deficit or a trade imbalance. How would you advise him, if there is any way, to rectify the perceived trade imbalance? And do you agree that there is a trade imbalance in terms of exports versus imports?
Of course, there is a trade imbalance, and that is one of the imbalances, a major source of imbalance on the trade are foreign companies locating factories in our country. That is, producing, investing in America. What that means is that more foreigners are investing more in America than Americans are investing in foreign countries. So I would ask the president, well, what would he do? Would he stop these huge companies from overseas of opening up factories and producing in the United States? I mean, these companies find around the world, they find that the United States is so economically attractive that they will relocate a lot of stuff to the United States and then ship it overseas to their home countries. And so I would ask President Trump, well, would you want to stop foreigners from investing in our country? Because if we did stop them from investing in our country, the trade deficit would be lower.
Now, we don't hear a lot of conversations about this aspect of trade imbalances and things of that nature. Why do you think we don't hear a lot about this?
Well, I don't know. I think that the Americans, there's no reason for Americans to know enough economics, know a whole lot of economics to be able to understand some of these principles. But politicians love doing things that help visible beneficiaries and injure invisible victims, because the visible beneficiaries of the steel tariffs and the aluminum tariffs will be companies, steel and aluminum companies, and their CEOs know who to give political contributions to, and their workers will know who to vote for. The people who are hurt by the tariffs, they won't know what happened.
Now,
a politician always wants, it's a kind of heads I win and tails you lose.
We're coming up to a break, and I only have you for a short amount of time. So when we come back on the other side of the break, I'm going to ask you just to make that plain for us, how the visual beneficiaries are awarded. And I think that's pretty obvious, but maybe to explain a little bit more about the hidden victims of these types of policies. And then I have a question for you, as time will permit, because there was a recent economic forum in Davos, Switzerland, where Joseph Stiglitz took issue with Milton Friedman. I'd like to get your response to his economic opinions, arguing that Milton Friedman's economic presentations contributed to some stagnation in the American economy. You're listening to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio. I heard that laugh, Dr. Williams. I want to unpack it on the other side of the break.
You shall not murder. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. This is the 6th commandment of the 10 commandments. You shall not murder. We are asking schools all over America to put this on their marquees, put this on their signs out in front of their school for 1 week to remind America's students that innocent life is precious. Help us spread the word about this campaign to your friends and family. Please go to our website, afa.net, and sign our open letter to America's schools. We need to proclaim this message, you shall not murder, across the land. Why? Because gun control alone will not solve matters of the heart. We need our young people to understand that murder is a violation of God's law, and also it's a violation of the laws all across this land. So help us. Go to afa.net and spread the word.
Here's Dan Celia with today's Stewardship Moment.
Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew 6, verses 2 through 5. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. You know, so many ministries are proclaiming the gospel and need your help. Hopefully the most importantly is your church. These ministries, and for the proclamation of the gospel, they need you to be a quiet and faithful steward and giver.
You've just heard a Stewardship Moment with Dan Celia of Financial Issues Ministry, helping you plan, give, and invest wisely. For more information, log on to financialissues.org. That's financialissues.org.
This is Tim Armstrong from the Worthy Walk radio program, inviting you to join us as we study the scriptures verse by verse each day, Monday through Friday at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, here on American Family Radio. We will study the Word of God and learn to apply its truths to our lives each day. The Worthy Walk, Monday through Friday at 6:30 p.m. Central Time on American Family Radio.
Share the message that Jesus changes lives. One way to proclaim this amazing news is by wearing and sharing the colorful American Family Association's He Lives Easter buttons. If you're a business owner or pastor, order several to give away. We encourage you to wear a button yourself and share the rest with others so that they too can proclaim this life-changing message. The button fits in your pocket and it's easy to share. They're sold in packs of 10, so get your AFA Easter buttons at afastore.net. That's afastore.net.
Shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here in American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. I have Dr. Walter Williams, famed economist and overall bright light in our country, on the line. And we were discussing before we went to the break President Trump's tariffs plan, and Dr. Williams made reference to visible winners and hidden victims of ideas like this. So if you would, Dr. Williams, if you can pick up right there, just to kind of flesh that out a little bit more for us, maybe with a practical example of hidden victims of plans like this.
Well, matter of fact, if the listeners would go to my website, it's walterwilliams.com, and put in the seen and unseen, they would find several columns that have been written about this. And for example, in terms of the Bush cuts, the Bush tariffs, back in 2002, it turned out that it cost consumers $800,000 per job saved in terms of higher prices. And the Consuming Industries Trade Coalition, which represents steel-using industries, they point out that there were 4,500 job losses in no fewer than 16 states. And so, again, I think it's fairly clear that the tariffs cause invisible victims. Now, in a slight defense of our president, he could be using tariffs as a political ploy. He might not really believe that 25% tariffs on foreign steel and 10% on aluminum. He might not believe that in his heart of hearts. He might not believe that that's a good idea, but he might be using it as a strategy. Mm-hmm. So to renegotiate NAFTA and renegotiate the other trade deals. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but I think even if it is that, I think it's a very, very poor decision.
Mm. Okay. Now, in the time remaining, I want to tackle this Joseph Stiglitz character. I actually stumbled across him. I wasn't looking for him, but I stumbled across him, and I found it interesting that he took issue with Milton Friedman's influence on the American economic landscape, and more specifically, him being an advisor to former President Ronald Reagan, and identifying what he describes as a stagnant economy. Is this something you're familiar with? I assume that you are.
Well, I'm not familiar with it, but I took classes from Milton Friedman when I was at UCLA when he came to visit, and I ultimately became a friend of his. And he was probably the top economist of the 20th century, and he was a strong advocate for personal liberty, which includes economic freedom. And one of the issues that people make a mistake with is that saying that that United States trades with China, United States trades with Canada. That's just plain nonsense. That is, when I buy a Mercedes-Benz, I trade with a German producer. It's not the United States Congress trading with the German Parliament or the Japanese Diet. It's individuals trading with one another, and so one has to ask the moral question: why should if I want to buy tomatoes from a Mexican producer, and the Mexican producer wants to sell me those tomatoes, why should anyone have a right to stop that transaction? I mean, it's a moral issue. That is, I own Walter Williams. That tomato guy, he owns himself. And if we come up with a mutually agreeable exchange deal, who else's business is it?
That's a great question. And the Stiglitz character took issue with the fact that Milton Friedman argued that economics and business interests are best served when you have the business owner is pursuing a profit motive, as the profit motive has a benefit for the business owner and residual benefits for society at large. He argued that's not the case.
By all means, that if you ask the question, just look at an empirical question. If you ask the question, in what areas of our lives, we Americans, are we most dissatisfied? Do we see Americans picketing clothing stores or computer stores or supermarkets? Well, the areas, and they're profit-making centers. The areas where we're dissatisfied with is the motor vehicles department, the public education system, the trash collection. Those are non-profit activities. So the profit motive forces people to take into consideration the wants and desires of the consumers. If there are no profits, well, teachers around the country, they get paid whether the kids can read or write or not, or whether you like it or not. The motor vehicles department, the motor vehicles division, they get paid. Those people get paid whether they serve you nicely or whether you're mad with them or whatever. So my idea is that the good life requires people earning profits. That is, in order to get my business, they must please me. That is, the computer store, the supermarket, they must make me happy. But the motor vehicles department, they can get paid or not whether I'm happy or not. The school public education system, they get paid whether I'm happy or not.
Last question, because I know you have to run. What do you think, then, of the consistent refrain we hear about income inequality?
Well, I think there's productive inequality. That is, the people who make a whole lot of money. Let's go to the extreme, Bill Gates. Why does he have billions of dollars? Well, it's because he served his fellow man. That is, he's produced windows. His fellow man voluntarily reached in his pocket and plunked down $300 or $400 to buy his windows. And so when you're very rich, that proves that you're very, very good at serving your fellow man. Some of us are better, and some of us are not so good at serving our fellow man. And so we don't get as much from our fellow man. So in a free society, the way you get income, the way that you get money, is by pleasing your fellow man.
Dr. Walter Williams, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time at this late hour to come on to the program. I have to have you back because there's lots of other questions I'd like to get to.
And thank you.
All righty. Thank you. Well, Dr. Walter Williams, ladies and gentlemen, it's amazing how people take issue with those types of conversations. And as Dr. Williams alluded to, it deep down, I really believe that President Trump is so motivated to gain some traction on these international trade deals. I really believe he's using it as a political bargaining chip, which is why Mexico and Canada were excluded from the initial conversation to reshape NAFTA. And once the NAFTA contractual relationship is redesigned, I think you'll see an adjustment on the whole tariffs issue. Now, I wanted to present this story to you because this is straight out of Looney Tunes. Truth is often stranger than fiction, where you have a woman, the name Patricia Ann Spann, who is 45 years old, has pled guilty to felony incest. And I'm saying incest. I won't get into any seedy details. We'll just talk facts, and then I'll share some opinions about this. 45 years old, pled guilty to felony incest, and she has now been sentenced to serve 2 years in prison, and then upon her release from her prison stint, she will be on probation for an additional 8 years. The maximum sentence for incest in Oklahoma is 10 years, so she'll serve 2 years in prison and have 8 years of probation upon release. She was guilty for marrying her biological daughter, Misty Velvet Dawn Spann, who was 26 years old. Miss Patricia Ann Spann married her daughter about 17 months after same-sex marriage became legal in Oklahoma. And I'm just reading that from the story. My opinion, there's no such thing as same-sex marriage, but let me keep going. Now, in order to avoid the incest snag, Patricia Ann Spann attempted to sign the marriage license. They got marriage licenses, y'all. Attempted to sign the marriage license using what appears to be her maiden name of Patricia Ann Clayton. She told investigators she really thought there was nothing illegal about the relationship because her name no longer showed up on her daughter's birth certificate because she lost custody of her daughter in 2014. Yeah. To add insult to injury, back in 2008, Patricia Ann Spann tried to marry one of her sons. Not tried, did marry one of her sons. And that marriage was annulled due to Oklahoma's incest laws as well. Now, I just have some questions. Because isn't the mantra of our day, live and let live? Love is love. You know, love trumps hate. Loves trumps hate. Why then, and most of you know if you listen to the program, this is tongue-in-cheek, but why should Patricia Ann Spann and her 26-year-old daughter, she's 45, her daughter's 26 years old, they're both of age, right? Why should Patricia and Misty, and what kind of name is Misty Velvet Dawn? I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? That was one of those moments where I thought I was thinking, but I was talking. Misty Velvet Dawn is 26 years old. If we use the rationale employed in Obergefell, love between consenting adults, why can't that be legalized? So you're telling me then, because if there is a recoiling to this story, that means you're telling me that there are some consenting adults, consenting adult relationships that we believe should not be sanctioned as marriage. So the question I have is, well, if we can redefine marriage to allow two men to get married, why can't we allow biological moms and daughters to get married? And most of you see where I'm going now. Because most people, when they hear about this biological relationship between a mother and a daughter, they'll say, of course not. But they're consenting adults. Now, if you're going to be consistent in your ideology, you have to say, amongst your sexual deviancy panoply of letters that you're adding alphabets every day, you have to allow moms and daughters on that same plane if you're going to be consistent. Can you see why people like me and others have said, listen, marriage is either going to be God's way or it's everything else. There's no middle ground. Because if you put the Obergefell plaintiffs side by side with Patricia Ann and Misty Velvet Dawn, what's going to be the distinction between the two? If love is love. And what I'm saying, guys, is that Patricia Ann may be going to jail right now, but if we don't put a stop to this foolishness, Patricia Ann won't be going to jail in the not too distant future. You're going to find all kinds of contorted presentations that they would say continue to push the boundaries. I would say continue to thumb their nose in the face of God. Guys, this is wicked. And of course, we know that this woman married her son first years ago, now married her daughter after being reunited with her. But if we're going to establish a sensical framework in our country, we have to recognize that once you reject God's way, you open yourself up to everything else. There's no middle ground. And for not necessarily the individuals involved, but Satan's plan, because remember, who's the author of marriage? And who's the author of human identity and sexuality? It's the Lord. The Lord refers to the representation, the authentic representation of masculinity, maleness, and femaleness as being bearers of the Imago Dei. The Lord describes the marital union in Ephesians 5 and in other places as the living, breathing illustration of Christ's relationship with the church. The ultimate goal in marring the image of God as it pertains to human identity and redefining marriage to allow for the passions of the flesh, if we want to be honest, the lust of the flesh. The objective is to mute the voice of the gospel and to mar the image of God in our society. That's the truth. Let me get this in because we're getting close to the break. So it turns out, and the Daily Caller broke this particular story, that the Fusion GPS political campaign combination to collect opposition research on a presidential candidate didn't start with President, then candidate, now President Donald Trump. It turns out in 2012, President Barack Obama's campaign hired Fusion GPS to find opposition research and to dig up dirt on Mittens Romney. And how did President Obama's campaign pay Fusion GPS? They developed an attorney-client relationship between the campaign and the law firm of Perkins Coie, and then used Perkins Coie to funnel the money to Fusion GPS. In an effort to try to hide those payments, they did that. And because it was learned that there wasn't much interest in actually finding out who was doing the whatsits, that the Clinton campaign then attempted to repeat what they were aware the Obama campaign did with Mittens Romney. You see, they had a dry run, a test run, if you will. You know, you have fire drills. When I was in school, when I was young, we had fire drills, prepare ourselves just in case the real thing comes. They had a test run. And the thing that's so galling to me is there no one in the national talking snake media that would be interested in this particular story? Is there anyone interested in doing a little bit of journalism? It turns out because it was a pretty standard ploy at that national level to have these opposition research firms and these types of things. And in case you're wondering, the reason why these people hire law firms to funnel the money, because once you establish an attorney-client relationship, that gives you another air of confidentiality. Whereas if you just find your friend and you use your friend to do your dirty work, your body work, and if they get summoned to court or subpoenaed for something, they would just have to tell the truth. But if you have the attorney-client privilege, you could try to keep some things under wraps. This, my friends, is galling to me. The fact that they did this, yes, but the complete disinterest that seems to be endemic amongst the landscape of the talking snake media. Did it in 2012, repeat in 2016.
Hi, this is Jim Stanley, and we're partnering with the Ministry of Preborn to help save babies' lives through ultrasound. Here's how a nurse describes the power of an ultrasound.
Last week, just one example of a mom who came in was very abortion-minded, and when she saw the picture of her baby on ultrasound and heard that beating heart, it was a defining moment that just broke her, and she said, I just can't allow this baby to be killed.
By letting a mother hear her baby's heartbeat and see her baby in the womb, she will choose life 80% of the time.
I cannot tell you how many times a baby's life is saved through ultrasound. It's just an incredible tool.
Underwrite a free ultrasound and help save a baby's life. Go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've been all over the country helping disaster victims who lose everything.
It's truly a blessing. I really don't have the words to express.
And yet they see a glimmer of hope when a volunteer shows up.
Building the home, that's the second reason we're here. The number one reason is to share the gospel and give them hope.
It's everything that's right in America. I mean, it really represents the best that we have to offer.
That's one of the main reasons for doing it, is being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and coming out and working with so many wonderful volunteers.
I just feel like it's important in this day and age to teach a child how to serve.
Please go to our website, 8daysofhope.com, and click on Get Involved, submit your email address, and the next time we go anywhere with a disaster, we'll invite you to come along as well.
I love coming in the job room because you can see these pieces of paper. They aren't just a piece of paper. Right. It's a family that's hurting, and it's a gospel opportunity.
I just thank God, for this moment. I mean, I'll be back in my home, and I know it's going to be awesome.
Come love others with 8 Days of Hope.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes with news and commentary next. A North Carolina family is grieving after the unthinkable happened. Their 3-year-old boy is dead, his mother injured, along with 2 paramedics. Police say a drunk driver slammed into an ambulance, taking the child to a hospital in Winston-Salem. The suspect, Jose Romero, age 27. Police say he was driving without a license, and they also believe the man is an illegal alien. According to court documents, the driver blew more than twice the legal limit on the breathalyzer 2 hours after the accident. Federal agents have placed an immigration hold on Romero, so it's unlikely he will hurt any more citizens. That's of little comfort to the family of the dead 3-year-old. He is not the first American killed on American soil by an illegal, and he will not be the last until Congress gets serious about securing our borders, until Congress believes that American dreams matter too. I'm Todd Starnes.
The Hamilton Corner podcast and 1-minute commentaries are available at afr.net and urbanfamilytalk.com. Back to the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. I want to let you guys know we will be taking calls this segment. So if you want to be a part of the program, you want to discuss anything we've navigated thus far in the show or what comes up in a little bit, you are welcome to do so. If you want to call, the number to do so is 888-589-8840. That number, once again, is 888-589-8840. Any of the topics we covered, they are fair game to navigate. Let me make sure my stuff is ready to roll. Yep, I'm ready to roll. So if you want to call, phone lines are open. Well, I alluded to at the very beginning of the program that famed scientist Stephen Hawking has now passed away. And I said this, that when I first heard the news, that I had just an immense amount of sadness because based on all the evidence and information that I have, it seems that Stephen Hawking died the same way he professed to live his life, which is a life where he did not believe God existed. So because of that, as a Christian, I can't learn that information and not be stirred by it. But I have a little audio I want to share with you. Then I'm going to dig into this a little bit more. So if you would, Jay, please play clip number 4. Sorry, not number 4, number 3.
The renowned physicist Stephen Hawking has labeled himself as an atheist, clearly stating that he doesn't believe God exists at all. Hawking reportedly made the announcement in an interview at the start of the Starmus Festival taking place at Tenerife in the Canary Islands. El Mundo, a Spanish newspaper, was able to get an exclusive interview with Hawking and headlined the story with the scientist's statement about his beliefs. Hawking is quoted in the interview saying, "What I meant by we would know the mind of God is we would know everything that God would know if there was a God, which there isn't. I'm an atheist." But this isn't the first time that Hawking has mentioned his lack of faith in a divine higher power.
Do you believe in God?
God may exist, but science can explain the universe without the need for a creator.
Science can explain the universe without the need for a creator. If you know anything about Stephen Hawking, you know he had tremendous amounts of physical disabilities. He had to speak using the assistance of a particular machine instrument. As I stated earlier in the program, he showed his life was a depiction that people should not be defined by their particular disabilities. He demonstrated that his mental faculties were tremendous in terms of his ability to consume information, to digest it, and convey ideas and things of that nature. But his life literally stands for the proposition, in my mind, and he shows that intellect cannot save you. Intellect cannot save you, nor can any other natural pursuit. Wealth cannot save you. Connections, prestige, none of these things can save you. None of them. And it immediately brought to my mind Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Just going to read this one verse. It says, "It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart." You have this proverbial wisdom offered, saying that it's better to go to a funeral, basically, than to go to a party, because the funeral demonstrates for us the way that all mankind will end up. And the living, who is wise, will take to heart what we're observing. I think Stephen Hawking's death gives us an opportunity to pause and reflect on our personal mortality, on the fact that it is appointed to men once to die and then the judgment. If your sins have not been judged on this side of eternity, you will face God as the righteous judge and have your sins judged for the first time. That is a fateful, fateful judgment. It also causes me to reflect on the church's function in fulfilling the Great Commission. Are we sharing the gospel? Are we communicating with the urgency that is necessary? Do we really believe it's appointed unto men once to die and then the judgment? I saw a comment that said it seems like the body of Christ is not as concerned today as it was in times past concerning the souls of men. I think that's an overbroad generalization. I think you can say some who profess to be Christians are not as concerned. But I do believe that there are lots who are concerned. There are people who are still going on mission trips and things of that nature. But in a lot of ways, we have other interests and things that have captivated our attention. And so I would just encourage you, and I see the phone lines are filling up, so I'm going to move on to that very quickly. But I would just encourage you to employ the wisdom provided for us in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 2. In light of Stephen Hawking's passing, and not just his, I know as I'm talking, many of you are thinking about people that you may know in your neighborhoods. I tell you guys all the time, I grew up in a very violent neighborhood that I've had. I never forget when I was 12 years old, one of my teammates died at 12 years old. At 12 years old. Where does eternity rank in our priorities? And do our lifestyles bear out our verbal professions of eternity's rank and our priorities, or would our proclamations of eternity's priorities in our life be denied or contradicted by the way we live our lives? That's the question I have for the moment. But to the phone lines we go. First, in the great state of Texas, where Jeff is on the line. Jeff, thank you for calling the Hamilton Corner. Welcome to the program.
I love your program. You're an excellent patriot and a man of God. Appreciate it. The economist that you had on earlier kind of made my point for me when he said, hey, if the next word's nuclear, what you have is what you have.
Yeah.
Well, if we don't have manufacturing, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. General MacArthur, great general, said if we ever lost our manufacturing basis, we could not sustain war over a period of time.
That's a great point, Jeff. That's a great point. There were lots of things that Dr. Williams said that I want to broach with him to follow up on. And you guys don't know a lot of the background things. I had to get him in when I could. But there are a lot of questions that I have that I'd like to ask and follow up. And that's a great point you bring out, Jeff. Thank you for presenting that to the Hamilton Corners audience. We'll go next to West Virginia, where Walt is on the line. Walt, thank you for calling the Hamilton Corner. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Abraham. I just had two quick comments.
Sure.
The first one was, when we were talking about the lady and her daughter out in Oklahoma, when you open that door, when we open it to the same-sex marriage, I agree totally with what you said. It really opens the door to any sexual deviancy. I hate to even list them, but, you just move on down the line. What fence do you push over next? Are we going to push over another one, then another one? And our rationale will always be, well, it violates a biblical standard. That's why we don't want to push that fence over. But I agree with you with your statement about it's inconsistent of people who support these deviant lifestyles if they're going to say that one's okay and another's not. And but my second point too is that there's so much abuse that can take place where you could take an example like maybe two brothers could get married even if they didn't have even if they didn't want to have a homosexual relationship, they could say, oh, he needs my benefits.
Yes.
Let's get married. I worked hard, you didn't, and you can get your health care through my job. And you could just do any sort of combination to where people just use it, work the system to get benefits. So it opens up a terrible, in every single way, a terrible thing to do, really.
Walt, you're absolutely right. Thank you for your call and your comments. And listen, I challenge anybody who supports the Obergefell Supreme Court opinion, and you would argue that same-sex marriage should be sanctioned and allowed legally, I would argue and challenge you to then articulate for me why this woman in Oklahoma should not be able to marry her daughter. What is the basis of your argument? Because if you support the Obergefell decision and you believe that consenting adults, all right, and that I believe is a vacuous argument, but let's just use it for the sake of the conversation now, that consenting adults who love one another and are committed to one another, they should be able to marry without any type of qualifications or categorical distinctions whatsoever. Then why can't Patricia Ann marry Misty Velvet Dawn? Some who are further and willing to articulate the insanity that many of these deviancy supporters believe, but they won't say it publicly. Some on the extreme will say, well, that's right, Abraham. Let them get married too. And I'm saying that this example gives a great opportunity to present the hollow nature of this argument, that if you're going to simply say that love is love, then on what basis would you exclude Misty Velvet Dawn and Patricia Ann from being able to participate in that love being love? Back to the phone lines we go. Next to Pennsylvania, where Brad is on the line. Brad, thank you for calling the Hamilton Corner. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Love you, brother. Really appreciate your show and what you do. I wanted to disagree with Dr. Williams slightly. The whole thing about the tariffs. I don't fully understand that part of it, but foreign manufacturers do not invest in America by coming here and opening factories. We've sent most of our factory jobs overseas because of the cheap taxes, because the corporate tax is so high here and so low everywhere else, that, and Trump did do a little bit of something to try to even the tax playing field with his infrastructure bill, but I believe that until the tax playing gets fair, it doesn't matter if he imposes tariffs to the point where it's cheaper to make and build here, that it's not going to change.
So what do you think, Brad, just a quick follow-up question, what do you think about the tax bill that President Trump signed that reduces the corporate income tax rate down to 21%? 21%.
That I agree with that. That that's what it needs to be. It's almost, I hate to say too little too late, because there's time for companies to come back to America, but not having to tax their goods coming into the country doesn't give them much incentive to not just stay where they're at. I mean, from where I'm from, this place used to be booming with jobs, and they've all left. They've all gone overseas or to Mexico or wherever because it was cheaper. It was cheaper for the company to move their whole factory, spend $1 billion to build a factory, than it was to stay here and pay the high tax.
Thank you, Brad, very much for your call and your comments. And Brad is sharing the sentiment that many people have echoed. Quite frankly, I think it's part of the reason why President Trump was elected, that he resonated with people who feel the exact same way that Brad feels. And I think there are a lot of people, because of things like the tax bill and his willingness to even announce something like tariffs, it heartens them into thinking that the president really does care and is concerned about what's happening in America. So thank you, Brad, very much for your call and for your comments. Next, we'll go to Georgia, where Fred is on the line. Fred, thank you for calling the Hamilton Corner. Welcome to the program.
Abraham, I love your program. I mean that. Truly, God's with you. I got two quick comments. I heard this morning on the major networks, Stephen Hawking didn't believe in God, but it was said this morning on the major networks that he died on birthday.
Whose birthday?
Kind of ironic. Albert Einstein.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Great thinker. Yes, sir. Well, it was on the major networks this morning. I didn't either. And my second thing I wanted to mention, Abraham, with everybody knowing all the information about Barack Obama and everybody else that's been involved with the Fusion Group, why haven't they basically put together some kind of congressional committee and investigated all of this, and especially like with the Clintons, and brought everybody to bar? I mean, if Trump was caught up in something like that, they're already trying to impeach him. It's like the Clintons and all the other people, the upperlings and the FBI and everybody else that was involved with the fusion thing. There's enough evidence right now to prosecute them.
Thank you, Fred, very much for your call and your comments. It's amazing because it seems the further we dig into this stuff, we find out that President Obama and his administration is at the top. I've long said partly, or if not the primary reason why Hillary Clinton wasn't indicted concerning the email scandal, because there was no way to do that without implicating former President Barack Obama. And now it appears that the entire scope of this whole fusion GPS, Russian collusion debacle, that if you really unweave that thread, you pull the thread all the way, it won't just stop at the Clinton level, it'll go all the way down to the Obama level. And so these revelations, they just came out, it just was released by the Daily Caller, but the question I'm still asking is that I wonder if there will be any courageous journalists that will dig into this. I have a gut feeling, but I'd love to be proved wrong. Thank you for listening to the Hamilton Corner.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.